From the Arizona Daily Star and Tucson.com, this is the Wildcast.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Wildcast podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the Wildcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Justin Spears talking basketball with Bruce Pascoe. I'll be later joined by PJ Brown. We'll be talking about the Arizona women's basketball team and their latest win over the ASU Sun Devils, sweeping their in-state rival. But, man, Bruce, it was a big weekend for the Arizona men's basketball team, beating the UCLA Bruins and then also beating USC on Thursday, sweeping the LA schools. It was their first sweep of the Pac-12 season. Tommy Lloyd got his 50th win. He's the fastest head coach to 50 wins in Pac-12 history. And also, I think Arizona showed that, hey, they don't got to put up 80 to 90 points in order to beat you. If they're going to score under 60 points, they're capable of beating you. And beating a UCLA 58 to 52, and there's a lot of things that go into this game we're going to talk about, but I think, Bruce, this was a big weekend for Arizona basketball because coming off that loss and how they won against the LA schools, I think is a big step forward.
Yeah, 50s all the way around. I mean, who would have thought they'd not only score in the 50s, but win in the 50s? It's, really something else. I mean, you consider the way this team started the year, scoring 100 points in 3 of their first 4 games, I believe, and, most offensively efficient team until about New Year's, and then they've kind of been they've really struggled with that lately, but teams have really come to attack some of the things they do. And now they're sort of making this mid-season transition to maybe a team that's a little better defensively than we thought. And the key is, can they continue to pivot and win games in different ways? And certainly Saturday was a big step that way.
So you look at UCLA's backcourt, Bruce, and we know how these guards can score. Tiger Campbell, he's been there for a long time, a veteran, very savvy player. Jaime Jaquez is a go-to scorer for them as well. Then you added David Singleton, and you combine all of those guys, and they shot 10 for 40. David Singleton didn't even score a single point. It was over 5 from the field. I do want to say it was a bad night shooting for UCLA. There were some shots where they had some clean looks, and the shots just did not fall. But also, huge credit to Jack Murphy, because I was actually talking to Jay Billis before the game, Bruce, and right after he was doing College Game Day, and Jay Billis told me that he saw kind of the defensive game plan that Jack Murphy had in place for UCLA, and it's very impressive, and you're going to see it later on. And sure enough, we saw Courtney Ramey, Kirk Risa, Kylan Boswell, Cedric Henderson, Pella Larson, like the perimeter players, I thought really stepped up defensively. And that was really what won the game for Arizona when it's all said and done.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a combination. You're right. They had some open looks, but it is, it's always kind of, it's not really something you can really point to exactly, collectively on, especially 3-point shooting and how good 3-point shooting defense is. Is it the other team just being bad? I think, frankly, you could probably give the crowd a little bit of credit for the 3-point shooting that UCLA did, because I think at some point they just got a little rattled, and they just, which is unusual for a veteran team like that, but this is the one place where that can happen. And you miss a couple, and maybe you're open, but you've had to take a couple extra steps to get there because of what U of A done, and you're not quite set and in the same kind of rhythm. There's just a lot of little stuff like that. It's hard to really pinpoint what happened, but you're right. They've had struggle with this all season, like especially without Christian Koloko, and I think that's a big thing that Tommy's talked about a little bit, but doesn't always get mentioned. Like without him, the defenders on the perimeter have struggled, and the coaches have struggled with how aggressive for them to be, because they don't have that rim protector behind them. They have Umar Ballo, who's a great player in a lot of ways, but not quite the same defensive player that Koloko was. So, do they extend out? How much do they help, et cetera? And we saw against UCLA, they seemed to find a good kind of middle ground, a middle ground there where they were able to defend them, but not leave things open a little bit.
So one thing our readers / listeners don't know about you, Bruce, is that before you came to Tucson, you worked in Las Vegas, covered some UNLV basketball, the Tark era, but then
the tail end. I'm not at the tail end of it. Yeah,
the tail end of it, yes. But you also covered a lot of boxing matches. You've been to a lot of fights. Did that environment at McKale Center, was that akin to a boxing match? It felt like there was a lot of hostility because there are a lot of factors, right? UCLA rivalry, it's the best rivalry on the West Coast in college basketball. And both teams are ranked in the top 15, right?
Yeah.
I mean, borderline top 10. Arizona's number 11. But you also have the Mac Etienne factor. He was coming back a year after his spitting incident where he was cited. Man, there was just a lot of factors that went into the game, and the next thing you know, Bruce, at the tail end, you're finishing up your game recap, and you got a sheriff's deputy right on your shoulder.
Yeah, I mean, that was crazy. I thought it was a overzealous fan towards the end, and I couldn't believe it. But I was looking at them as you were too. I mean, they had at least doubled up on the police and the regular security force there. It was intense. So I would say it compares to like a big time pride fight as far as the anticipation and the mood. The difference is that it's highly one way or partisan or whatever you want to call it there, where everyone's rooting for one team, whereas at a fight there's a little bit of everything, and it's mostly anticipation of it's just such a big physical deal, and you're wondering if somebody is going to get hurt or somebody's going to have their ear bitten off or whatever, those kind of things happened, and so it was different that way, but the sense of anticipation was big, and I think that was especially in light of what happened last year. So
yeah,
there was a lot of that, but they actually turned out pretty well, I think, from Arizona's perspective, in the sense that it was a big exciting day. Everyone seemed to have a good time. From their perspective, they won, and there were some FU chants and stuff like that, but nothing to the level of last year. So I think at least crowd management wise, they probably had reason to be happy too.
Real quick, Bruce, because we got to do mailbag questions, because I know you're a busy guy and you got to be on your way. But what do you make of just Arizona sweeping the LA schools? It was the first sweep of the season for Arizona, and now they really give themselves a chance in the Pac-12 race. Now, they still have some work to do, still 2 games back from UCLA. That was only UCLA's first conference loss. So Arizona still has a lot of work to do, and Tommy Lloyd even said, quote, we have to earn that right to talk about Pac-12 championship pictures. So I thought Tommy Lloyd was very humbled by it, but Arizona, they have a chance, but it's going to be a very tough stretch for them.
Yeah, I mean, they're still 2 games behind, and, they'll have a shot at UCLA, but it's going to be at Poly on the last day of the season. So, maybe it comes down to that and they can pull it out, but that's a big ask. Arizona historically has had a lot of trouble in LA with both of those teams. So, what they hope is that they basically need to go, undefeated or maybe 1 loss until they get to that last weekend, and then hope UCLA stumbles once or twice again. And then if they can tie them, of course they would have a tiebreaker depending if they can win that last game in LA. But I think for Arizona probably, I mean, yeah, maybe they can win it, but it just seems like UCLA at 8-1 even after that loss, that's going to be tough to surmount. UCLA is not, unlike last year, they're healthy. They've got everybody. They're getting Amari Bailey back. They didn't even have Bailey on Saturday, and he's a pro. I mean, he's an NBA player. So I think from Arizona's perspective, sure. I mean, if you're a coach, you want them to go for that championship. Maybe they can still get there, but on the other hand, I think really, maybe you don't want to say this if you're them because you still want it, but they need to make sure they at least get that first round bye in the tournament, finish in one of those top 4 spots, probably number 2. Then maybe they can win the tournament and sort of make up for things that way and still get a 2. They're still probably, as of right now, arguably a 2 seed, maybe a 3. So winning the conference isn't the be all end all for this team and what's going to happen with this season.
All right, Bruce, now let's move into mailbag questions. Every single week moving forward, we will have a mailbag, so appreciate you guys for submitting your questions via Twitter. We did this during the football season, Bruce, and we had a lot of mailbag questions, so we're going to carry it over to basketball season. Our first mailbag question comes from Tyler Cole, and Tyler Cole, big shout out to him, always been supporting us here at the Star. He asked, is there any team Arizona doesn't match up well with? Not in conference, but maybe for March. I've been watching a lot of Big 12 basketball. TCU is going to be a tough out because
were last year.
They were last year, but now they return everybody, and those guys are going to be hungry and extra motivated. And it seems like Big Eddie Lampkin kind of lost a little bit of weight, and has been moving very well, and he looks like a very just solid big man. So I think TCU will give Arizona some fits if they end up meeting in March.
Yeah, I think that I think Washington State showed this a few weeks ago, and we'll see how it goes Thursday for Arizona. But they have kind of run a smaller lineup, and then they have a big in Muhammad Gay who can be a stretch 5 at times. And granted, that's highly unusual, but Arizona doesn't really have anyone who can guard him easily, and that's a problem. I think as good as Tubelis and Ballo are inside, I think for them to guard out on the perimeter is a little more of a challenge, and then they get into that situation where they have to throw Pelle Larson or Seth Henderson out there on the perimeter, and that's worked out at times, but it's a stretch. I think that's one of their toughest things to deal with. I think, to your point about TCU and maybe Houston or whoever, they have shown that they maybe are just a hair tougher than they were last year, and I think that those 2 games in the tournament last year really burned on them, and so maybe those kind of matchups themselves aren't going to be that bad, but it's more the individuals that that could burn them in some cases.
All right, our next question comes from Andy Blaho. Andy asks, how must McKale Center evolve to keep pace with the other programs in the nation? Coach Lloyd has already mentioned this in the past. It will need improvements in new amenities at some point. Bruce, you've been around the Pac-12. McKale Center, compared to a lot of other Pac-12 venues, is pretty up to date, I would say. But Arizona's also not trying to compete with the other schools in the Pac-12. They're trying to compete with the Kentuckys and the North Carolinas and the Kansases. They want to be in that top tier of programs competing for a national championship every single year, and I think they are with Tommy Lloyd as their head coach. But as far as amenities go, or like what I would change about McKale Center, I would think to maybe put the student section behind the benches, or at least on the other side of the court to really make it that college atmosphere like you see at other high profile venues like a Duke. But is that realistic? No, because there are a lot of people in Tucson that have deep pockets that spend money on season tickets and spend money for those luxury seats sitting right there in the lower bowl center court at McKale Center. So as much as I would love to see the students be behind the bench or across the court, there's just no way that it's feasible because of just the pockets that go into the season tickets.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, well, in Arizona, most schools, football is the drive in the train in the finance department. Arizona, it's equal, and that's considering that most of the TV money is allocated towards football. If you consider gate revenue and donations for those seats, it's basketball is the leader, and they absolutely have to sell those seats between the baskets to people who will pay big money for them. They can't afford to put students there; they just can't. And obviously, to your point, there would be a massive uprising if all of a sudden they displaced a bunch of those season ticket holders, put students there. That's just not going to happen. Unless the only way you can do that is if you do redo the arena and then you just tell everybody, hey, we got to do it this way. But even then, they'd be losing millions to do it that way. That's not going to happen. So, I think actually, compared to the other ones in the Pac-12 and even some of the high ones, as far as like the seating, they did do that, the video boards. It's pretty up to date. If you compare around the league, I think Oregon and even the recent redo to Poly Pavilion are, maybe just a hair above Arizona as far as overall amenities. And I think Oregon, frankly, probably took it a little too far. It's a little sterile in there. It's not, it doesn't. I think they lost a little bit of their home court advantage there at times. But however, to their credit, they do put students between the benches on one side in Oregon, and that does help make up for it. But the rest of the arena is pretty quiet, except for the band in the corner. They have a really good band, and then the students. But at Arizona, I think it's a pretty good deal. I think the video board's good. I think the one thing they could do maybe more is just some of the concourse and some of the amenities as far as concessions and all that could probably be maybe upgraded a little bit. And you have some places.
Add an EG's, man. Add some local flavor. I know they have some Mexican food up on the side that we sit.
Yeah.
But I always thought, like, man, EGs would do so well at Arizona basketball games.
Yeah, it would. But yeah, it would. I don't know that it would dazzle.
The cleanup crew would suck.
It wouldn't dazzle recruits or anything like that because they don't even know who
I see
what
what you
EGs
mean.
is until they get there. And then there's little things like way up high, the upper sections at McKale are actually pretty antiquated. The seating, the bathrooms. I mean, there's still some of those old, like, what do you call them? Like those, trough urinal things. I mean, that you haven't seen since 1960 or something.
Yeah.
There's still some of that exists up there.
Wow.
But again, that stuff doesn't really get seen, so it's probably not too big a deal. But there's little things they could do, and certainly, and maybe they could do more with the concourse outside, which they've done, certainly with the Lute Olson statue and some things, but that kind of stuff could maybe be dressed up a little bit more too.
By the way, a buddy of mine, Kalen Miller, he came up to me at halftime and he said, "Hey, when you guys do a mailbag for your next podcast, my question, I'm just telling you right now, is why isn't Adama Ball playing?" And I think it's because Tommy Lloyd doesn't really like where he's at right now, and can't maybe trust him. And Tommy Lloyd even said after the game, this is how it goes sometimes. And I think it's more disappointing for Adama Ball than rather a Henry Vasar. And don't get me wrong, Henry Vasar had high expectations because, Jonathan Gavoni and all those guys at ESPN Draft Express, they were talking about, oh, this guy's the best European prospect. And you thought, man, he's going to be a really good option for Arizona off the bench. But we all had higher expectations for a guy like Adama Ball. We thought he was going to be pretty much like Pelle Larsson last year. But he didn't even get any minutes against UCLA. When the last time Arizona played against UCLA, he hit 2 critical three-pointers, Bruce.
Yeah.
So I think that's a little discouraging for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference there was, right, I did expect more too, but I think the difference there was last year they had to have him in there. Kirk Caruso was out. They needed an extra body on the wing. And, they just, I think at that point too, they had a little more of a cushion. They had already won the regular season conference. If they went down in that championship game against UCLA in the tournament, wouldn't have probably even hurt their seed. I don't think it would have made any difference. However, they had to win Saturday if they were going to stay in this race. So I think that's really the biggest difference why he didn't play at all. I think certainly behind the scenes he's shown some things. He hasn't been super productive in games, and probably in practices there's something missing too. I mean, we don't see the practices, but that's absolutely got to be part of it.
Yeah.
But I think Saturday Tommy looked at this team and says, "We got to win this game. I'm stepping on the accelerator. I'm going to go with these 7 guys." And and I think typically Arizona has shown a little bit of fatigue on Saturday, but when UCLA is in town and you're at home, the adrenaline takes over, and that's what they did. So he just went with the guys that are producing, and we'll see. I think Ball will probably get in these games maybe this weekend. But yeah, I mean, he knows 7. Everybody knows 7 is not sustainable. They need at least another half guy they can turn to, and it's probably going to be him or Henry Vasar, or ideally for them both of those guys. But they both have things to learn. I think the other difference between Ball is he's a second-year player. He is still very young, though, so you give him a little bit of credit there. But he knows the system. He's had a summer to work on it. He played well for France and the U20s, and all these things add up to a player who should be contributing a little more.
Mpaz asks, why is the defense so man-heavy? I feel like we've moved away from mixing defense to adjust to opponents' strengths. I saw they played a lot of man against UCLA, but if they can play man against UCLA, they can play man against anybody. But I haven't been paying too much attention to the defensive sets that Tommy Lloyd has, but I do know that they play a lot of man defense.
Yeah, I mean, but that's always been the case. I think last year maybe mixed a little more up, but Tommy's still, at heart a man-to-man coach, and it's actually, and lately it's hard to argue with what they're doing. I think it's more been about, again, adjusting the perimeter guys and how much they help and what they do with them. It's
well, that's another question, Bruce. Is Barry McConnell said, how does Arizona improve guard play? And I feel like that's a big part of what we're. I mean, we wanted to see what they could do defensively against UCLA, and I thought Courtney Ramey did a pretty good job. Pelle Larsson did a pretty good job. I think the only issue or concern with Arizona right now in the backcourt is Kirk Caruso's shooting, and also he's been turning over the ball a lot lately.
Yeah, there's definitely been as they say, kind of some maybe a little bit careless, a little bit, not secure ball handling. That's been an issue, but I think defensively they've improved. And I think that's probably a combination of strategy and game planning, like you're saying, but also, these guys playing a little bit more harder nosed and focusing in. And I think in the case of Ramey, who's probably been their best defender, certainly was last weekend. I think he's really, now that it's been half a season in this system, he's really, clicking. I mean, I think early he was trying to do some stuff that Tommy Lloyd didn't like, that he was used to doing at Texas, and some subtle things the way he moved, and now they're kind of more on the same page, and we're seeing that makes a difference. So it's kind of hard. I mean, if they can keep up the way they played last week, and it's hard to argue with what they're doing defensively. It's much improved.
All right, Bruce. Lastly, looking forward to the offseason, what's the read on Tubelis and his evaluation for the NBA? I haven't seen a lot of NBA draft love or buzz for Azuolas Tubelis. I think at this point right now, he's maybe projected to be a mid-second rounder, which I'm sure he would take. Christian Coloco, he fell to the second round, but he's been awesome for the Toronto Raptors. And if you're good, you're going to be able to get some run no matter where you land in the NBA draft. And I think Azuolas Tubelis is one of the best running big men in the NBA, in college basketball, and has shown that this year, and I think has gotten a lot tougher. Would I like to see a little bit more of his outside shot? Yes, because I think in order to play his position in the NBA, the 4, man, you got to really be able to efficiently shoot the 3-point shot. But you also have to be able to be aggressive and score at multiple levels. And one thing about Azuolas Tubelis is that his inside game is pretty terrific. So I think the more he continues his outside shot, hey, if Channing Frye could end up being in the 3-point contest, I think Azuolas Tubelis can maybe work on his outside shot and become a decent NBA player.
Right. Although Channing will tell you that he always had that 3-point shot, but Lute didn't let him take it. Whereas I think Tubelis, we don't know if he has it. I mean, I'm looking here, he's 9 for 20 from 3. He has been pretty efficient. He just doesn't take. He takes 1 a game, and when he's left open for whatever reason, that's as not going to cut in the NBA. He needs to be a little more able to adapt there. So, but yeah, I think the thing that's impressed me, I didn't think last year he wasn't ready. I didn't know, but he has shown a toughness. He's much more efficient rebounder, more effective rebounder, just that speed at his size, 245 pounds to lumber down the court like he does. Nobody hardly can do that. That's a skill. You know how the NBA is, Justin. I mean, yeah. You have that one singular skill you can make in the NBA. They don't want well-rounded guy who does everything a little bit pretty good. They want a guy who's really good at one thing and can they can exploit that. And that might be his thing. I mean, I do wonder about his 3, and I wonder about his defense. Can he guard an NBA 4? That's going to be a challenge. But he does have that one skill he's very good at, and he's gotten better in the other parts of his game around the basket. So. I definitely think he's got a good chance, whether he goes as second rounder next year or maybe tries to come back and get himself in the first round as a senior. We'll see.
That'll be a big win for Tommy Lloyd if they're able to get Azuolas Tubelis back. All right. Well, Bruce Pascoe joining us in the Arizona Daily Star office, recording the Wildcast podcast. Bruce is traveling to Washington. Arizona's facing Washington State on Thursday, and then Washington on Saturday. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Bruce Pascoe and find his work on Tucson.com and the Wildcaster app. All right, let's talk some women's basketball with PJ Brown. All right, now time to some Arizona women's basketball with Arizona Daily Star beat reporter PJ Brown. PJ, thanks for joining us on this Tuesday afternoon here. We got a big-time matchup between the Wildcats, I believe now number 19 in the AP Top 25. Are they still 19?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So now they're number 19. Now they got to host the Washington schools after beating ASU. They've swept the Sun Devils this season. So the Wildcats feeling pretty good about themselves after beating the Sun Devils, but the Washington schools are no slouch. And then you also look at what's ahead, like a Stanford and a Cal. That's going to be a very tough stretch. But PJ, we're going to get into mailbag questions in just a few minutes, but what did you make of Arizona's win over ASU and how Esmery Martinez was able to put up a 13-point, 15-rebound double-double?
Yeah, I thought that game was really important for Arizona. They had a tough weekend the previous weekend playing Utah and Colorado, and to come back and still look like they've improved on things, that they're still getting better, offensively and especially defensively. I think that was really important. The other thing I think was important was, and we've talked about this, the fact that everyone played. So everyone got more experience in a Pac-12 game, especially for those freshmen. It's really important because as the season wears on, they'll be called on more, and they will need to step in and be ready to play Pac-12 opponents. And then as you get into the tournaments, it becomes even more important, not only for their confidence, but just staying ready. And so that's all important. There were some really key learning things, I think, in this game, and a lot of people played really well. Again, that only helps as they get further into this season. So when you look at Kaylin Gilbert, who's done it before, but now she comes off the bench again and she gets 5 quick points. I think it was in the second quarter. And you look at Maddie Connor getting more minutes again and really, scoring a lot and showing a little bit of improvement on the defensive end. You see Paris Clark getting more minutes and doing a little bit more with those minutes. All of that is really important. And then when you look at an Esmery Martinez, the really key thing for her was that not only was she all over the boards, which was incredible, offensive and defensive. I think she had 7 offensive rebounds, which helped then Arizona get second and third chances, which is always important. But the real key thing for her was she didn't get in foul trouble. And when she doesn't get in foul trouble early, that means she can stay on the floor longer in a game.
No, PJ, she didn't not only just like avoid getting into foul trouble, she avoided picking up a foul, period. She didn't have a single foul the whole game. And for her to get 15 rebounds, I think it was like the perfect amount of aggression, and she can balance that.
Yeah, and that's just incredible. That's always the key. What not only happened with her, but, they don't have a lot of posts. So her and Kate, they have to stay out of foul trouble. And even when you look at the guards, I mean, Shayna fouled out the previous weekend in both games. She never fouls out. I think maybe once in her entire U of A career, she's fouled out. That hurts. And it was down the stretch in both of those last maybe 3-4 minutes. That's when you need Shayna on the floor. That's when you need Esmery on the floor or Kate. You need them to be there, when it comes down to crunch time. And even earlier in the game, if they're able to play and be there earlier in the game, then maybe you maintain that lead or whatever it happens to be. So the fact that Esmery could be on the floor that long and play that long, and that's just what happens, right? Then you can really see everything that she brings to this team.
Some breaking news just before we started recording this podcast. Helena Pueyo, she's been with the program for the last few years. She's a senior now. Pueyo has been named to the Naismith Defensive Player of the Year watch list. And Pueyo becomes the first Wildcat named to the watch list for the first time since Ari McDonald in the 2020-21 season. So pretty good company there for Helena Pueyo to be mentioned among. But Pueyo, she's averaging 2.6 steals per game, and she leads the Pac-12 and ranks 33rd nationally and has picked up a steal in every game this season. And, of course, her season best, she had 6 against New Mexico. And also, on the offensive side of the ball, she's averaging 6.5 points, has been a key contributor to Arizona coming off the bench. But, PJ, you've watched her play this season. What makes her a great defender?
Well, Helena's always been a great defender. A lot of it is her length, but she's also really smart. She knows when to go after tips, and blocks and steals without, fouling or without getting off balance or out of position or anything like that. She's a very smart defensive player. And what's even more remarkable, I think, about this is what you stated there, that Ari McDonald is the last one who was on this watch list. Sam Thomas was one of the best defenders in the nation for 2 years running.
Yeah.
And the fact that whoever votes on this, and it's not me, whoever votes on this didn't see Sam Thomas, but now they're seeing Helena Pueyo. Kudos to Helena for that, because it's obviously a very hard thing to do to get on this list.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that she's on it just shows that she's doing a lot of the right things and she's consistent. You always know when Helena is on the floor that she's going to shut down her opponent. You know what you're getting from her, and it makes it hard for Coach Adia Barnes to take her off the floor. And that's a great thing to have, is to have that lockdown defender.
No doubt. All right, PJ, now time for everyone's favorite segment. It's mailbag time. We did this during the football season, and we always had a bunch of submissions. Now we're bringing it over to basketball. So we went through a number of mailbag questions with Bruce Pascoe earlier in the podcast. Now let's go through the women's basketball questions. This one comes from Ray Coolness. And Ray asks, any hopes of players hitting the transfer portal or no players? Would love to see it. Also, has Lauren Ware started working out with the team? Even though she won't be playing this year, do we have a status on her recovery? So when it comes to the transfer portal side of things, PJ, where do you see Arizona falling in that category, whether it's departing players or potential incoming players? Now, you don't know exactly who's going to be coming, but maybe a player of need or at a position that they need. And what's your take on Lauren Ware and where she's at in her recovery?
Sure. Transfer portal first. In this day and age, people leave all the time. So I can't guarantee that nobody's going to leave. And I do think that Adia Barnes will dip into the transfer portal after the season, like she usually does, and get specific players that fit her culture, that also fit a need. So, and, part of that and how many she brings in will also depend on if players like Helena Pueyo, Esmeri Martinez, and Lauren Fields come back for a fifth year. I would imagine that they would, but it all depends on a few things. I don't know if Lauren Fields will be done with her studies and maybe just wants to go on, and play pro or start her life outside of college. With Esmeri and Helena, it could be a matter of sometimes, or even Lauren, it could be a matter of players like that wanting or needing to go pro because they need to make a living, at some point. So we don't know. And then with the NILs coming, the basketball team just got their first team NIL this past week, which is great. And looks like there's going to be more NIL deals coming to the women's basketball team. That could also keep a player here for a fifth year. So depending on all of that, then, Coach Adia Barnes will sit down at the end of the season, see who's returning, and see where the holes are and how she has to fill them. Now moving on to Lauren Ware, she's not practicing with the team. She's in rehab. She'll be in rehab for the most likely, for the next couple of months. And she, I don't have a specific update on her. I haven't been able to talk to her yet, but we do see her on the bench at games cheering on her teammates. And I believe that she's going to practice and doing the same thing. She's very involved still with the team. And so that's a good sign for her, because it's hard to have an injury and be out. So I think that's a very positive thing. I'm under the impression that everything's going along okay in her rehab and her recovery. Again, I'm waiting to talk to Lauren whenever she's ready. If you're listening, Lauren, I'm here. I want to talk to you and see how everything's going. And that's basically what I know about Lauren Ware at this point.
All right, another question submitted from @BearDownGoDubs. Andrew asks, at this point in the season, what will define a successful postseason for both teams? PJ, I'll let you start. What makes a successful postseason for Adia Barnes and her club?
Sure. I think the goal is to host, first of all.
Yeah.
And they have a really good chance. I mean, I know in the AP poll, they're 19 right now. We have a lot more basketball to play. But I also know that we've talked before about the NCAA selection committee, and they look at a lot of different things that AP voters, I'm one of them, that AP voters typically don't look at. And so they don't totally base it on wins and losses. For example, they will look at that Utah loss and say, that's a positive, even though it was a loss, because you went there, you went toe to toe away from home with, against a team that was ranked higher than you, and you almost upset them. That counts a lot towards seeding at the end of the season. So I think, hosting is a goal. And to be successful, I think that's important to have the first two games here. These teams at the beginning of the season always say they want to win a national championship. I don't think that if they don't win a national championship, that's not a successful season. Just like last year when they lost in the second round, I still think that was a successful season. Yes, maybe they would have wanted to go further. Maybe the fans wanted them to go further. But to get that far in a year after you don't have your, one of the greatest generational players ever to play at Arizona, or, one of those top players in the country, and Ari McDonald not coming back, you have to find your footing. So to go to the second round was a pretty good season, and they did a lot of good things last season. So to be successful, I think it's continuing to improve at this point, put yourself in a position to do well, come together as a team, both offensively and defensively. And whether that's winning in the second round, going to the Elite Eight, going to the Sweet 16, it's hard to say because we don't know the matchups, right? They could go to the Elite Eight and play South Carolina. Well, then is that not a successful season because you lose to South Carolina and they're favorites to win the national championship? I don't think that makes for an unsuccessful season. I think that's just how the pairings went. So, I think the most important thing that we as observers, this team need to keep in mind is it's all about improving game by game, and for this team to keep coming together and keep doing the right things at the right time and beating the teams they're supposed to beat, doing all those things to put them in a chance, the opportunity to host at home, and then see what happens after that. And hopefully they'll get a good path so they can go take a deep run. Although, the national championship year, they had a really difficult path, and somehow they overcame bigger and stronger players at Texas A&M, a really tough Indiana team, and of course, a traditional powerhouse in UConn. So anything can happen at any point, but they just have to focus on now and keep getting better.
Yeah. And I also think, for Tommy Lloyd's squad, to answer the question here, I think that losing Benedict Mathurin, Christian Koloko, and Dalen Terry, all guys who are playing in the NBA right now, it's so tough to replace those guys. And Arizona could have easily lost to TCU in the second round last year. But things went in their favor. They were able to close them out. Benedict Mathurin had a great moment in that game, putting a highlight dunk, and then Christian Koloko had a putback dunk as well to really put a stamp on their win. But that was a grinded out win for Arizona, and it took everything out of the gas tank in order for them to beat TCU. And then they ran into a Houston team that was just red hot. And obviously this year they're among the top teams in college basketball. So Houston's going to be back right there in the mix. They'll probably be a number 1 seed or, number 2 seed at worst. And that's, hindsight, that loss to Houston actually looks like a pretty good loss for the Wildcats in the tournament. So they got to the Sweet 16, lost to a really good Houston team. How they're going to look in the tournament this upcoming season, like PJ said, it really all comes down to matchups and also a little bit of luck. In the month of March, you need a little bit of luck to go your way to have a memorable season. So I think, if Arizona, if they play their cards right, or, if the right cards are dealt to them, I should say, because the selection committee is the one who puts the brackets together, then I could see the Wildcats going to the Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight. I'm not going to sit here and say Final Four because, following Arizona basketball, living here in Tucson for as long as I have, the Wildcats have not made the Final Four since 2001. It is so hard to make the Final Four. We've seen this team be very vulnerable at certain points this season, but we've also seen them beat Tennessee and also UCLA at McKale Center. But those 2 games were at McKale Center. How do they look at a neutral site court? That should be pretty interesting. So I think this team has a lot of potential, but if I am keeping the expectations realistic for the postseason, I say getting back to the Sweet 16 or better, Elite Eight, that I think that constitutes as a pretty successful season for Tommy Lloyd in year 2. I mean, shoot, Tommy Lloyd's already the fastest coach in Pac-12 history to 50 wins. I know Arizona fans want to get to that Final Four, and I think he will get to it, but be patient with Tommy Lloyd because a lot of good things are on the way. But PJ, thank you again for stopping by. I know you're busy this week covering press conferences. What else do you got in the works right now?
So we've got I just talked to Jade Lavelle, and we've got a really different type of kind of cool story for Friday on Jade. So keep your eye on that. We've got 2 games this week, and I'm also doing a story on that first team NIL deal. It's a crossover story with women's basketball and softball. So that's kind of fun. So keep your eye out for that. And lots of good stuff. We're working on, this is not women's basketball, but we're working on a special section for softball and baseball. So comes out in the beginning of February at some point. So definitely watch out for that because we got some cool stuff coming out with that one.
We got that stuff. Plus we have the 50th anniversary of McKale Center opening up its doors. We have a lot of work coming your way in the latter part of January, of course, but man, February is going to be a very productive month. Same with March with the NCAA tournament. Plus we have a couple of professional golf tournaments making their way down here. Plus Tucson Rodeo is always a big thing. So springtime is always a busy time in the sports realm in Tucson, Arizona. And the only place to stay up to date with all those things, Tucson.com, of course, but you can also download the Wildcaster app for free off the App Store and Google Play. Whether you have an iPhone or a Droid, the mobile app, the Wildcaster, is everything that you need if you're an Arizona sports fan. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Wildcast podcast. PJ, thank you for stopping by. Bruce Pascoe, thank you for joining us earlier in the podcast, and appreciate all of you for listening to the Wildcast podcast.